I post a lot of content about decorating and creating my witchcraft altars on social media. Specifically on TikTok, I get a lot of questions and comments about my altars. As I think about it, I realize that it can feel very intimidating to create an altar, worrying you'll do something incorrect, or even just trying to create one but not vibing with it or enjoying it can feel very defeating. So in this episode, let's talk about all things witchcraft altars, how to decorate yours, what to put on it, and how to find inspiration for your altar. First off, let's start really basic. What is an altar? Well, to put it as simply as possible, an altar is a sacred space dedicated to spiritual practices. I think that's really it. I mean, you can keep your altar as simple or as elaborate as you want. And if you're somebody who meditates or prays, you actually might already have a small altar. If you have a candle or an incense holder that you light before you sit to do your spiritual practice, then you very well might have an altar. And this could be a slightly controversial take, but I think if you have a beauty space where you get ready, like a mirror or a vanity, this could also be considered an altar, especially if you're interested in self-care or self-love and you set intentions or you do affirmations or you even listen to music, which can be very much like spell work while you're getting ready. I mean, you're basically already engaging with and using an altar, right? It's a sacred space dedicated to a spiritual practice. Of course, you could level that up by adding even more witchy spiritual practices and encouraging even more intention with something like your beauty space or your small prayer altar. But I think at the end of the day, those really are altars already. Not only are altars something very easy to set up and use in your own practice, but they're a part of spirituality that date back centuries, if not millennia. And as with many spiritual practice, there's not really a definite beginning of the use of altars, although we do know that in ancient cultures in the Middle East and in places like China, they would set up altars in temples or within nature. And they would often use these altars to connect with deities, make offerings, perform different rituals. They were spaces for connecting with the divine, and they were often used as a way to ask for guidance from spirit or protection. Jewish and early Christian practices also involved the altar, and according to the Hebrew Bible, these altars were often used for sacrifice. Exodus 20:24 and 20:25 state that these altars were actually made of natural outdoor elements like earth and stone, and that they were very, very big and obvious altars that were often used for large group worship and offerings. And early on after Christ, the Christian altar evolved into a wood table that looked similar to the type of wood tables that we have in our homes now that we likely eat dinner at. And those held the Eucharist, and they became the central part of the church worship. When we travel to like the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, when witchcraft was kept quite secretive, thanks to the Christian church, as many of you know, a lot of people in Europe actually still had small home altars that they would keep secret, and they would do a lot of witchcraft and magic that was really influenced by folk magic. And during this time, their altars kind of resembled ours, actually. They would use elements like candles and herbs, gemstones, amulets, and other tools for healing and protection. But as for how witchcraft altars have become so popular today, many credit that, along with many other parts of witchcraft, to Gerald Gardner. He popularized the altar in the 1940s in the United Kingdom with the birth of Wicca. And Wicca is a modern pagan religion that is based on pre-Christian religions and cultures at its core. I'm sure there is a better definition for that, but that's essentially what it is if we don't want to get too deep into it. And when people hear Wicca, a lot of people think it's synonymous with witchcraft and witches. They think that it's the same thing, but as many Wiccans or many witches will tell you, it is not the same thing at all. And Wicca is actually a religion, whereas witchcraft is a practice. And I know that is something that gets very misconstrued, especially with different religions and people who mostly with people who do not support witchcraft. They believe that it is a religion, but it's really not. It's a practice. And that is how there are so many people who are religious that are also witches. I'm sure you may have heard of people or may be a person who is a Christian witch. That's a very common thing. And there are many Wiccans who don't practice witchcraft, and obviously many witches who don't identify as Wiccan. And while we're on this topic of religion, I would love to add that there are many other religions that use altars and that have for thousands of years. I know that we mostly spoke about altars used in Christian cultures, but religions around the world have used and still currently use altars in their practice. They're very common in voodoo, Norse and Celtic paganism, Hinduism, Buddhism. A lot of indigenous traditions use the altar, and same with Santeria and other Afro-Caribbean religions. Concept of the altar has been used, like I said before, for centuries, for thousands of years in religion. But I guess to clarify here, Gerald Gardner brought it into the witchcraft practice. It became more commonly used in witchcraft practices and not solely under a religious dogma or practice. So over the past century, we've been using a lot more altars as a form of witchcraft practice without necessarily requiring religion as the focal point of the altar or even at all. Many people, many witches have altars that have nothing to do with religion. For example, I myself am actually not religious at all. I know I'm an incredibly spiritual person. Obviously, I heavily identify as a spiritual person, but I do not resonate with really any religious groups or practices personally, although I do not judge anyone that does. But basically, I use altars all the time and I enjoy them in my witchcraft practice. But for me, they have no connection to religion. But that is just my personal decision. Depending on your beliefs and ideology, you can choose to incorporate your religion into your altar, or you can be like me and simply make an altar based on your spiritual or witchy goals or desires that are completely unrelated to a religion. And I am obviously not a historian. I don't have any education on religion or the history of religion. So I'm not one to talk about it really. I'm actually going to put the topic of religion down completely for the rest of this episode. I just wanted to give this little bit of context because I just really wanted to clarify that, an altar can be a very religious, a very sacred thing under the religious umbrella. It can be a part of religion that is super important to you, or like some religions, they don't use altars at all, and that's fine. Either one is fine, obviously. And so I just want to really reiterate here that you are completely welcome to incorporate religion into your altar in any way that you feel resonates with you in your practice. But I just want to say that from this point forward, as I speak on altars, I'm going to talk about them from a witchcraft practice perspective, not from a religious perspective. So I'm not going to mention items that you could use or that you should use from a religious perspective at all, because I don't find that, to me, it's relevant, but to you it might be. So definitely look into, anything that you might want to add that is related to your religion if you are religious, or, ignore it completely like I do. That is totally your choice. I also think it's interesting to talk about altars and where they kind of came from, what they were used for, and how we use them today, because I just think that's always such an interesting thing. I find that especially with witchcraft and divination, there is so much history, and a lot of it there isn't necessarily a pinpoint for when it began, because it evolves and changes so much with different religions and beliefs and philosophies and technology. So it's interesting just to see where it came from and how it evolved into what it is today. Well, I could definitely go way more in depth on the history of altars and their usage throughout different cultures around the world. But I just kind of wanted to give a little overview here as we move on and put down the topic of religion. So what would someone add to their witchcraft altar? This is definitely more my realm now, less about religion, less about those strict rules, and more about what you would do from a witchcraft perspective. So the options for what you want to add to your altar are endless, which makes it very overwhelming and I think very difficult for people who are beginning. It's like I can put anything I want on an altar that's a witchcraft altar. Like I said, if you're following a religion, there may be more strict rules as to what you could or couldn't do with an altar. But when it comes to a witchcraft practice, you can put anything that resonates with you, anything you want onto that altar. So it feels very overwhelming at times for what to put, where to start. So what I want to share with you is kind of my steps, how I create my altars and what works for me. Now, where I like to start, and I find the easiest, is to consider what I want the altar to represent or what I want it to do for me. This makes it so much easier to figure out what items you want to include when you have a kind of direction for the vibe that you want to go for. And now this can be that you want the altar to represent the current season. It could be, your birthday and you want it to represent you. It could be a past loved one, like something like a Samhain altar that I did recently honoring my ancestors. Or you could think about what you want the altar to do for you. So do you want it to help you attract money or heal or attract love, whatever that may be? Figuring that out, making a definite decision on what you want it to do for you, can make it a lot easier for you to figure out what you want to include. Of course, you do not have to have a set idea for what you want your altar to represent or what you want it to do for you. You don't need to do this at all. However, I do find it to be just a helpful step if you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed for what to include. And if you've seen a lot of my altar videos on TikTok, you might have seen that if I feel called to redecorate my altar, like I'm sick of how it looks, or I just feel like it's been a while, it's looking a little bit dusty, and I want to, change it up a little bit, but I'm not really sure how to decorate it or what vibe I want to go for, I'll actually pull a tarot or oracle card and I'll use that as my inspiration. I love to do that because it takes off some of the pressure from me, and it's like I'm allowing spirit to decide where we should go. So for instance, this past summer, I think it was in August or so, I remember pulling the Queen of Wands as one of my tarot cards for inspiration. This is in one of my TikTok videos. And so since the Queen of Wands is so confident and creative and authentic, she's also very warm, I chose to decorate my altar with colors that reminded me of the Queen of Wands, like red, oranges, and yellows. And then I used crystals that I felt like fit that theme of confidence and creativity. So I use things like septarian, orange calcite, pyrite, aragonite, and carnelian. And I feel like deciding what you want to put on your altar has a lot to do with what type of witch you are and what you practice. So that's another place where you could get a little bit more definitive about what you want to practice or what you do practice, and that might help to kind of guide what you're going to put on your altar. It doesn't mean that you have to practice those things or be that type of witch forever, but it can help you think about what you might want to include on your altar. So for instance, in my personal witchcraft practice, I like to use crystals, herbs, natural elements. I love color energy. And of course, I love divination. So whenever I create an altar, I typically incorporate those elements onto my altar because they resonate with me. They're easy for me. I already own them. And I just am inspired by them because I love them. Another great starting point if you're feeling overwhelmed in creating your altar, or if you just want to challenge yourself to try something different with an altar, is to choose an item that you want to be the centerpiece or the focal point of your altar. So this doesn't have to be something that's large or spectacular, although it could be if you had something big and bold that you wanted to put in the center, but it's really just something that you're using as the center of inspiration. So an easy choice if you're feeling overwhelmed would be to put a candle in the center and then building your altar off of that one candle. Or maybe you put your tarot deck in the center as the center point and build from there. Again, this is where having an idea of what you want your altar to do for you can be helpful to think about before starting. So for instance, let's say you wanted to create an altar to attract love. Well, then you may want your centerpiece to be a red candle or a bouquet of flowers or something to you that really says love or attracting love, maybe even a perfume. If you wanted an altar for healing, you could put a centerpiece that was a bowl of water, a white candle, maybe even like a Band-Aid or a very, very clear symbol of healing, depending on what that may be for you. If you wanted an altar for attracting abundance, you could put something like money, obviously, coins, a bill. You could also do something like a green candle or some herbs that are connected with abundance. And let's say you wanted an altar for connecting with your intuition. You could put a crystal that is connected with intuitive abilities like amethyst. That's a very common one. Or you could use something like a purple candle. Like I said, not every altar has to have a specific goal or intention. Some altars are working altars, like the altar that you see basically in every one of my videos with the white table, all my plants, and my window behind it. That is my working altar. I use that altar to post content, to practice divination, to do my spell work, and anything random, whatever I feel like. It doesn't actually ever really have a specific intention, except for when I pull like a tarot card to kind of decide what I want the vibe to look like. But it's not really intended to be anything except for my working altar. So now that you have your intention for your altar, we can start to think about items that you may want to include. Now, I by no means am telling you to go out and buy a bunch of things. A lot of altar items can be found in your home or outdoors, and I also thrift a lot of my altar items. Every time I go to the thrift store, the knick-knack section hates to see me coming because that's where I find all of my altar decor. That can be a really inexpensive and environmentally friendly way to add altar items. And if you are looking for altar items, I do have a section in my shop where I offer many of the items that I'll be talking about today and other items as well. Just if you want to check out my shop and support a small business, I just have to throw that out there. I do have a magical tools section. And so today, rather than talking about a lot of really unique or more advanced altar items, I really want to talk about some of the very basic items. First off, let's start where I think a lot of people think of when they think of an altar, and that's with candles, because not only are candles amazing, they're very witchy, they're very beautiful, but they're such a great tool that so many witches resonate with. I feel like most witches love a good candle, and they can represent fire and light, but they're often used for setting intention, casting spells, honoring deities or spirits. And the fun thing about candles is that the different colors have unique meanings, and I have a free resource on my website for candle magic colors, but I'll also post it on my Spiritual Chats pod Instagram that just shows all of the different colors and what specific association they have in candle magic, so you can decide if there is a particular color you'd like to use in your altar that really goes with your intention. And they can be used as a center point of your altar, or you can decorate around your altar with them. You can use one candle, you can use 20, you can do whatever resonates with you. I personally love candles, but I tend to use one at a time. I don't know why, actually. I feel like maybe that's something I might challenge myself in future altars to add more candles. I think it's because I have like a serious fear that I'm going to forget about them. I recently actually had, in my bedroom, I have a love altar that I will sadly never show you online because it is a private space that I don't want to show. But I have a love altar in my bedroom that is very, very Aphrodite inspired. And I have a few candles in there, and I recently was lighting them and left the room and forgot about them. And then I came back and they burned down. Nothing bad happened, of course, thankfully. I shouldn't say of course. I should just say thankfully nothing bad happened. But I was like, ooh, this is why I don't often use candles, except for like one candle that I'm sitting with. But if it's a long taper candle, pillar candle, I get nervous because me and my ADHD, I will leave the room and I will forget that I was even doing anything to do with magic or witchcraft. And I know that's very taboo. You're not supposed to leave your altar set up, but I'm doing just fine. My spells are doing just fine. I don't follow the rules in the same way. But anyways, so I typically keep one candle that I light on my altar that I work with, but you could do as many as you wanted. And if you're on a budget, actually, birthday candles are amazing for spell work and to have on your altar as an altar tool. They are nice and short, so they have a nice short burn time, so you don't have to wait hours for them to burn if you want to do a spell with them. They're also inexpensive. They're accessible. A lot of people probably already have them in their home, and they come in a ton of different colors, so they're really great for candle magic. They're of course not as grand or gorgeous on an altar as a nice beautiful tapered or pillar candle, but they work really well if you're looking for something smaller and accessible. Another basic that a lot of witches like to have on their altar is the altar cloth. I don't personally use an altar cloth anymore, although I did for a while. I just felt like I was always getting them dirty, so I've actually stepped away from them personally. But I know many, many witches use them, and I used them for many years as well. I'll probably use them again at some point. They're also really great for beginners because they give you a little border or surface area that you can use to put your altar on, so you don't feel like you have to use an entire desk or space. You can make them a smaller size, and it just helps you to kind of get that intention of where you're going to place your items. So you can find true altar cloths online or in metaphysical shops. I even have some that I've handmade in my shop actually. But you can also use things like scarves, pashminas, bandanas as altar cloths. I've used all of them at different times in my life. You can consider the color of the altar cloth as well, similar to the candle magic. What type of energy you want to invoke could be the type of pattern or color that you want on your altar cloth. So if you wanted to attract love, maybe picking something like a scarf or a pashmina or something pink or something that has hearts on it. If you wanted a blue altar cloth, it could be great for embracing truth, communication, or healing. Purple would be a great color to use for connecting with the intuitive abilities or the divine. And yellow is also a fun color to use if you want confidence, new ideas, intellect. I find that for beginners as well, using a grounding color like black, brown, red, orange, or yellow can also be really great because it can help you feel more grounded and balanced when you're going into your witchcraft practice, finding that confidence, finding that creativity, really rooting yourself in your practice. I love those colors for beginners or someone that just really needs that extra bit of grounding. And then once you feel more confident, it's nice to move into those lighter colors like purple, blue, just to connect with the divine and more higher energies, if that makes sense. But of course, you don't have to follow the color of the altar, but it can be a great way to kind of set the intention a little bit further. But one thing that I will note as well with altar cloths, one of the reasons that I don't use them anymore is because they can get dirty depending on what you're using your altar for. Things like smoke, ash, water, food items could obviously stain or ruin your altar cloth. So that is something to be mindful of. If you have something very precious or special, you may not want to use it as an altar cloth. Maybe you can find a different way to incorporate it or use it only on special occasions. My personal favorite addition to my altar is crystals. And I offer crystals in my shop and I use them on all my altars. Always. Crystals all around my house. And you don't need big fancy crystals for your altar either. I don't even have any really massive crystals, although I wish I did. I just don't have the budget. But small crystals like chips or tumbles can work really well on an altar. And it can be also really helpful to consider the metaphysical properties of that crystal and if it works with your intention for the altar. So if you wanted an altar to help you find inner peace, let's say, you maybe wouldn't want to include something very intense like hematite or malachite, moldavite, carnelian, something that has a lot of energy boosting effects might not be the best for finding inner peace. So just be considerate of the metaphysical properties as well. Another very common item that is very accessible to most people is incense and herbs. Now, I myself am a huge fan of incense. Personally, I find them so helpful throughout my spiritual journey. If I want to cleanse, to help me with the potency of my spells, to help me feel inspired, protecting, I just find them so incredibly useful. I love the scent. For some reason, for me, incense are one of the major triggers for me to go into a spiritual state. But if you are somebody who is sensitive to scents or you're not interested in incense, then herbs also work really well. They're great if you don't want that stinky smoke of the incense, but they're essentially the same thing. I mean, incense are made of herbs. Herbs are also great for spell work on an altar. I like to sprinkle them over my crystals or my special items, which you may have seen in some of my videos. I also like to roll a lot of my candles into the herbs to help them amplify the candle magic. The type of herbs or incense you choose in your practice or on your altar is completely up to you, as with everything we're talking about here today. But especially with incense, it can be very specific to the fragrances you enjoy and like. But for herbs, you actually probably already have some in your home that would be great on an altar. And you can also buy cheaper herbs if you want to expand on your collection from places like the dollar store, Aldi, Walmart, even the Good and Gather, I think it is, brand at Target. They often have really well-priced herbs. And if you're wanting to use rose petals, jasmine, or chamomile, like more tea flavored, more like tea herbs, you can often find them in Chinese markets or Asian supermarkets. They sell food grade flowers that are dried in the tea section, and they're often really well priced and very beautiful. I remember when I lived in Vancouver, I'd always be hitting up the Chinese markets because they had such good dried flowers and at such a great price. And some beginner herbs that are really accessible, easy to find, and inexpensive that you might already have in your house, you probably do if you cook, is cinnamon. That's one of the most popular ones. It's great for abundance, love, passion, and protection. I think all these herbs that I'm mentioning today are great for protection, so I'm not going to add that to each of them, but herbs are very protective by nature. Rosemary is another really popular one. It's good for mental clarity, purification. Oregano for happiness, health, good luck. Cloves, another one that's great for prosperity, healing, strengthening your relationships. And if you're interested in like witch talk or you watch witch content, you've likely seen witches use bay leaves in their spells. They're wonderful for manifestation and for protection, of course. And another popular one is black pepper, which is a great one for banishing and protection. And while it is not technically an herb, I don't think, one of the most famous witchcraft tools is salt. And that is due to its protective, purifying, and grounding abilities. So that's another really great one to have. Let's talk a little bit more about the importance of incorporating protection into your altar. So we talked about a lot of all those herbs that are for protection, but really, why do you need protection? Protection items help to create this really safe, grounded space for your spiritual work. And you can find protection items in the herbs, like I mentioned, but also in things like crystals, amulets, incense, bells, and other tools that are used for protection. You can even put angels or symbols of the divine for protection on your altar. Like those cute little angel crystal carvings are amazing for this type of thing, and they're pretty accessible and inexpensive. So since the altar is typically used for spiritual practices and connecting with energies that are beyond ourselves, with things like deities, spirits, and elemental forces, protection items really help us to establish a boundary and to keep out those unwanted influences. And not only are they keeping out these unwanted influences, but they can really help us to remain grounded, to avoid drain or burnout when we're doing things like magic, which is incredibly exhausting. I often tell people that practicing magic or working with the occult, working with divination, it's like working out at the gym. Like if you're not used to it, it can make you very, very tired very quick. And so having these protection items can really help you to avoid feeling so drained or burnt out after doing magic. Protection items are great and they really strengthen and safeguard our practice. So I won't go into, too big of a tangent on protection items, but I do think it's something you should look into and implement, not only into your altar, but any sacred space you occupy. And I consider your home, your room, your office, wherever you spend your time, your car, I consider that to be a sacred space. So definitely consider adding some protection items. They can be small, just a little herb sachet or something, but definitely look into that. So with these 5 things that we talked about today, you could already set up a really, really lovely altar. But if we wanted to add a few more personalized touches, me and my crow brain love to add trinkets to my altar. You know that. And you can find statues and trinkets that match the energy that you want to incorporate into your altar at metaphysical stores, but you can also use smaller and cheaper items too. For example, I was actually recently gifting in all of my orders. I was giving these really small plastic charms when people placed orders in my shop. I'm sadly sold out of them now, but I'm trying to get some more in. But some of the items were these really tiny plastic ducks, and I kept one for myself, and it sits on my work altar to symbolize water without having to keep a bowl of water beside my computer. So dollar stores are also somewhere you can go to find these kind of small trinkets. Same with thrifting. They often have small seasonal decor pieces. You can find things as well like trays or small jars at dollar stores and thrift stores. And small jars are a witch's best friend because they're so great for so many things, but you can specifically put your herbs or salts inside of them, which is very wonderful to keep on your altar instead of having to have a big Horkin jar of salt on your altar, which of course you can still do. But you can also take it a step further and you can put something like soil or sand or water inside these small jars to kind of represent the outdoors, the elements, or even a specific place that you really resonate with, like a favorite hike or beach that you love. And I love charm casting. So for me, charms can also be a great trinket to add to your altar to help amplify your intention. I'm always adding 1 or 2 small charms like a locket, a key, a heart, whatever it may be on my altar. And with that said, keeping your divination tools on your altar is another great thing to add that many practitioners do. Putting your tarot cards, oracle cards, runes, pendulums, charms, your scrying tools, your mirrors, they all make great pieces to add to an altar. Even if you aren't intending to use them at the altar, it can be a really nice place to store them. And now that we have an idea of what intention we want to set with our altar and we know some common items that we can place on the altar, the next step would be to arrange the items in a way that aligns with your intention. So when you think about the placement of each item and how it resonates with the energy you're hoping to create, for example, you might want to place protective items around the edges to kind of form a boundary around your altar. You could put your grounding items in the center like an anchor for your intention. You could take abundance and love and put it toward the front to kind of invite those energies in, bring them closer to you. Again, you don't have to do this, but it can be helpful to help you organize it when you set it with that type of intention. And you can also start with your centerpiece or focal point that we talked about in the first place. Put that right in the center and then arrange the rest of the items around that fit the vibe of your intention. So this can really take time to rearrange and to set up. I don't think I've ever in my life just put each item on my altar and been done with it. I'm constantly fidgeting, removing something, putting something somewhere else. And that's fine. I mean, don't feel bad. I do that still. It's like anything, right? Like if you're decorating your home, you're not usually going to leave something in the first place you put it. You're going to put it somewhere and then realize, actually, I need something with more height there or more color, or I like it better in this room. Like it's very normal to be moving things around. Don't feel bad about yourself if you don't just set up a perfect altar on the first go or that you don't like it. I mean, for myself personally, sometimes I'm not even happy with my altar by the end of me working on it. Like I'll be working on it for a while. And sometimes this is terrible with videos because I'm like making a video that I've now filmed for however long, and now I'm like, I don't even like this altar, but for me to restart it, I'd have to restart my whole video, and it's just like, ugh, it can take so long. And so basically sometimes I'll even sit on it overnight if I'm not feeling super happy with it. I might leave it as it is for a couple of days or overnight, and I'll often think about what I don't like about it. Sometimes it's hard to see right away, but if you sleep on it or wait a few hours and come back to it, you might notice more clearly what you don't like about it or why you were unhappy with it. Maybe the color isn't right for you, or it feels too cluttered, or it feels like there's too many gaps. Whatever it may be more obvious to you when you take a break from it. You can also consider the direction of your altar, so where it's facing and what it's close to. So for example, if it faces the north, it could align with grounding and stability. East would be new beginnings and inspiration. The south is great for passion and transformation, and the west with emotional depth and intuition. But again, as with everything I've mentioned so far, this is of course not something you have to comply with. But if you are curious where to place your altar, using the direction could help to give you some inspiration. My altar right now, one of the ones that you see in my videos a lot, I think it's facing the southwest or southeast. I'm not even sure. Honestly, I'm so bad at directions. That's the only window in my room. So I'm not going to put my altar anywhere else because I want my plants on it. So I don't really care what direction it faces in. I'm going to set my own intention with what I want for it. So you don't have to decide it based on where it's facing. But if it is something, if you're feeling lost on where to put it, that can be a helpful thing to look into to kind of find inspiration for where to put your altar. And while you're at that, it's also really important to think about what is around your altar space. Thinking about what your altar is next to and what type of energy it's going to evoke. So for instance, if you put your altar, like I said, near a window like mine is, it invites obviously natural light, fresh energy. It's great for if you want plants on your altar. And if you wanted something a little bit more quiet, if you wanted something more healing, more secretive, you could put your altar in a small, quiet corner of your space. That would be better for, focus or introspection instead of putting it in front of a big window. So really what we want to do here is making sure that it feels harmonious with the surrounding areas. So some places that you may not want to put your altar, let's say you have a workspace that makes you feel stressed, maybe you don't like your job, you might not want to put an altar right next to your workspace unless the altar was to help you feel better about work. But if your altar is just to help you connect with spirit or something more fun and light, you likely wouldn't want to put it right next to your workspace because that can make you feel just more stress, more pressure to work. It doesn't feel good to be looking at your workspace. So you may not want to do that. So you also may not want to put your altar in a high traffic area, like at the entrance or a hallway of your home, especially if you have a lot of people that are entering or moving through your house. It could obviously be very distracting. It's also not very private. But again, maybe if you're wanting the altar to be something that your entire family engages in and it's something to create more joy and happiness within your family, then maybe you would want it in an entrance or a hallway of your home where people are going to see it. So there isn't really a straight rule of where not to put it, I wouldn't say. I think you can put it anywhere that it resonates with you, but again, be mindful of the intention you want to set with the altar and if it goes well with the place that you're going to be putting it. Please also be very mindful to keep anything dangerous out of reach of course, children and pets. Many incense, herbs, oils, plants are toxic to animals. And of course, if you are using candles, be sure to practice fire safety, which I never do, which is why I do not use a ton of candles in my practice. But once you feel that everything is in place, you can always offer a prayer, a blessing, an affirmation to your altar if you feel called to. But I know that I gave you a laundry list of stuff to do for a quote unquote perfect altar, but my best advice is just to follow whatever feels right to you. I've been practicing witchcraft for many years and I have broken many witchcraft rules. I've not cleansed decks, I've made spell bags incorrectly, I've incorrectly snuffed out hundreds of candles, I've gone way too long without meditating or practicing gratitude properly, I've said prayers wrong, I've made up my own prayers, I have pissed off deities and I've angered the gods countless times, but I'm still alive, I'm standing, I'm honestly thriving. Can I say thriving without sounding like an asshole? I don't know. I don't want to sound overconfident or smug in any way. I just really want to drive home the fact that you don't have to do things perfect. I have done countless successful witchcraft spells, and the majority of the time I have not, quote unquote, followed the rules. That to say, if I took my spell work and I posted each one on TikTok, I would get roasted in the comments because people would be upset about one thing or another that I did that I was not following the rules, quote unquote. And I don't care about that because I know for myself that my spell work has worked. My altars have worked. They make me feel good. They make me happy. And I think that one of the most important parts of witchcraft is about finding your power and harnessing it. And our power, I don't believe, is to like hoard money or tell people what to do. I think our true power lies within our ability to go inward and to connect with ourselves, to understand our desires, to follow our creativity and what makes us happy. And it's not about being perfect by any means. I think it's actually more about being messy and being okay with being messy. As humans, we are such dirty, imperfect little creatures. And I think that when we embrace that more than we try to hide it, we can find this beautiful truth. And as long as we're trying to be our best, to be kind, to be compassionate and empathetic to others, I think it gives us this freedom to make an altar wrong or to snuff out a candle before the spell is truly done. Like, I think that the divine rewards effort and intention, not perfection. That is one thing that I have learned through my practice. Please don't let anyone bully you into thinking that you're doing something wrong. If it feels right to you, do it. If you feel like you didn't like something you did, change it. As long as you resonate with what you're doing and you're following that spark of creativity and magic, then you are doing everything perfectly, in my eyes at least. I thank you so much for being here today on this episode, and I really hope that this gave you some inspiration for your altar, whether you are setting up an altar for the first time, you're curious, or you've done a million altars before. I hope this gave you something to chew on as you move forward. Ew, I hate that saying. I don't know why I said that. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. Again, I'm Reed or Emerald Lotus. You can find me at Emerald Lotus Mystic on Instagram and at Meadow Mystic on TikTok. I also have a new Instagram account, Spiritual Chats Pod, if you want to keep up to date with this podcast. I thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.